Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. Welcome back to Motorworks. Welcome back to Motorworks TV. It's time for another 5-Minute Friday, and we are going to do a lightning round on fasteners, the most common pieces of hardware that you find on your motorcycle, and the way that your tools interface with these three different types of hardware. Hex, a bolt or a nut. What we would call Phillips, but is not Phillips, and we'll come back to that in a second, and Allen or socket head, right? So hex head, cross head, which we commonly call Phillips, but is not, and socket head or Allen. It's like the 6 sides of a hex bolt, but it's in reverse. It's female, and an Allen key goes in there. So hex heads first, since they're the most common. I guess you could call it a pecking order. The pecking order of the tools that you choose in order to tighten or loosen any hex head on your bike, regardless of whether it's a little 10mm bolt like this guy or all the way up to a 27mm axle nut, is very important. And you want to, whenever possible, use a socket, a 6-point socket. It matches the 6 sides of the head of the bolt or the nut. It distributes that turning force of your ratchet over the broadest, most usable part of the flats of the bolt. And it decreases the amount of stress placed on that bolt. And if it's not had the best of care, it can make all the difference between rounding the head of that off or it coming loose or tightening up properly. So a 6-point socket preferable, whether it's a deep well like this one or a standard well, 6-point socket. Then most commonly combination wrench, right? And those are 12-point, like a 12-point socket, but they are also available as a 6-point box end as well. And sometimes the situation, cramped quarters and that type of thing, demands the use of a 12-point socket, and the same is true with a box end. It provides you not having to turn as far in order to get the wrench to fit. And the last resort is this open end. You don't use this guy unless there's a compelling reason for you to do so, because it only has 2 flats. So it can only distribute that turning force on 2 sides of that bolt or nut. And again, if it has not had the best of care, it can make all the difference between rounding it off and getting it to break loose or tighten up as you would like it to do. Next is crossheads, and the reason that we say that that's not what that is because though these 2 screwdrivers look almost exactly the same, they are not. Your Japanese motorcycle does not have any Phillips hardware on it. It has what is called JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard. And most of the time when you find this hardware is boogered up, it is because somebody has been using a Phillips screwdriver in it, and the fit is rather on the loose side, and it continues to cause problems, and it will eventually ruin that, and then you're going to ruin the head of that screw, and then you're going to have some significant difficulty dealing with that problem. So you want to use the Japanese Industrial Standard screwdriver because it fits snugly in there, and it's going to get that piece of hardware to break loose or tighten up the way that you want. It has much better feel, and it's much more of a joy to use than something that is barely adequate. So again, not Phillips, Japanese Industrial Standard. You can get a set of screwdrivers in JIS, and then you'll be much happier dealing with that type of hardware on your bike. And the damage sustained to Phillips heads often results in their replacement with Allens. Engine cover bolts are a common one, but there are other areas. So the engine cover screws that are JIS, I get boogered up over time, and they get removed from the bike and they get replaced with Allen bolts or socket heads. And the same rules apply here. You want to make sure you've got excellent fitment. So you'll be familiar with the ubiquitous Allen key, and these guys come in handy because they can make it into cramped quarters to get things loose. They can also be used at either end to get different work done. And when you're in a really tight spot, you can cut them a wee bit shorter. Every mechanic has Allen keys in his toolbox that he's modified to get different jobs done, and it usually involves shortening this up, sometimes shortening up the long side as well. But most of the time, when you're dealing with a socket head or Allen, you're going to be using either 3/8 inch drive or 1/4 inch drive Allens that go in there, and then you can use extensions to get to hard to reach places, and you can use a ratchet on this, and it's much better way to interface with an Allen or a socket head screw. So there you have it. Remember, use the best tool that you can. When you damage this hardware, it can cause problems for you that are really tough to get that bolt to loosen up or tighten up properly. And don't be afraid to replace hardware that's worn out. Hang on to that worn out one and go to your home center or hardware center and get yourself some new hardware to replace these things when they get worn out, or if they've been beaten up by somebody who was a little ham-fisted when they had your bike before you got it. All right? That's it. Have a good rest of your weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next week. All right? Take care. Cheers.